Welcome to the AfterMath. We're so delighted that you have carved time out of your Wednesday evening to join us. I'm very, very excited. We have an incredible group of guests joining us tonight to deal with some very pertinent issues that have surfaced in a particularly poignant way in events of recent vintage. I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, but allow me to just welcome all of you from wherever you're joining across the world as we present the Aftermath. The choice of that title is deliberate because as the protests have waned, which are very significant and important, the question that has confronted each of us is, what do we do now? For those of you who have been joining us the last several days, you will know that last week, Resurrection presented the book of Lamentations. Of course, the book of Lamentations is a book from the scripture where the prophet Jeremiah actually dedicates an entire book of the Bible to lamenting, to crying, to wailing the destruction of his nation, Jerusalem. Well, last week, Resurrection provided our family members across the world with an opportunity to lament. Each night we wrote our own chapter, sharing our despair and our disgust at the events that have happened in the wake of the horrific death of George Floyd. One of the questions that emerged over and over again during our conversations last week is, what are we going to do now? I asked you to hold that question back because I wanted to present a forum where we could move from pain to policy and to begin the process of really figuring out how to address these questions. As I reminded us, symbolic resistance, symbolic protest is very important. That's what the marches have been about. That's what some of the looting has been about. That's what setting the police station on fire in Minneapolis last week was about. It's about attacking the symbols of oppression. But as I shared with us, we've got to move from symbolic resistance, symbolic protest, to systematic protest. And on tonight, I'm very delighted because we have two men who are literally in the trenches who have been fighting against injustice in its particular manifestation in the criminal justice system. And I'm very excited because I'm going to have them help us begin to chart a path on how to solve these problems. Let me ask you to click, to like, to share. Please get your questions ready. We're going to converse for about an hour or so, and then I'll provide you with an opportunity to ask them any questions that you might have. We're very, very blessed to have just two very powerful men who I admire professionally and know personally, and I want to introduce both of them now. First, I'm delighted to present the Honorable Rupert Byrdsong. He's a judge in Los Angeles Superior Court. The Stanley Moss, Department 28 rather. I've been knowing Judge Byrdsong for many, many years. He is a graduate of Morehouse College, the greatest college in the Western Hemisphere. He's also a graduate of Vanderbilt School of Law. Prior to his appointment to the bench in 2014 by Governor Jerry Brown, for more than 20 years, he was a partner at the firm Ivy McNeil Wyatt, where I believe you were the first or the youngest partner in firm's history. At the time. And he started off busting his chops in civil rights litigation, became a California super attorney in the realm of employment discrimination law. I've known him many, many years. He blows a mean trumpet, cooks an incredible jerk chicken, and got a pretty good jump shot too. So I'm happy to have my classmate and my friend with us, a treasure for the city of Los Angeles, the Honorable Rupert Byrdsong.
Thank you, Pastor.
Welcome, glad you're here. And then, of course, Attorney Brian Dunn, who is a friend of Resurrection and a friend of mine, arguably the most celebrated civil rights attorney in the city of Los Angeles, the state of California, and probably in our time. For the past 25 years, this man, who was handpicked by the legendary Johnny Cochran to be his clerk, has presided over the Cochran Firm in Los Angeles. And last I counted, more than 200 cases you have won, verdicts totaling in the hundreds of millions of dollars. A man who, all the way from back to Geronimo Pratt, has just stood for African Americans, stood against police brutality. He is a graduate of University of California at Berkeley and the University of Michigan Law School. Just an incredibly brilliant man, himself a California super lawyer. He's a friend of Resurrection. He's been here many times. We have partnered to give scholarships to minority youth. He's done a series of legal clinics here at the church. So again, Brian, welcome.
It's an honor.
Thank you.
Truly an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, we're going to get right to it. I have a couple of questions I want to ask. And again, we're just going to have a conversation. Glad that you're here. I want you to be as honest as you can. Now, before we do that, there is a clip that Judge Byrdsong asked me to play as an introduction to the conversation we're going to have. So we're going to run that clip, and then we're going to start our conversation.
Lawyer speaking.
It's important in the midst of all the public vilifying of the police department, whose members acted completely within procedure, to remember Mr. McQuillan was no angel.
What?
Oh my God, I can't believe they said that.
Why would they even say that? What does that even mean?
Talking about somebody's child. That could easily be one of these children here.
That could have been one of us.
No,
Yes.
sweetie, no. Because if you get stopped by the cops, you are going to do exactly what they say, okay?
She's right. Listen to me. If you have to talk to the cops, there's only 7 words you need to know. Yes, sir. No, sir. And thank you, sir.
Exactly. You make sure you live to fight your case in court. You hear me?
Oh, Mama! Enough! Wake up! Let's say they listen to the cops and get in the car. Look what happened to Freddie Gray.
Yeah, and what if they make it all the way to the station? You remember Sandra Bland?
And let's say they do make it to trial. You see where that gets us? Don't you get it, Bo? The system is rigged against us.
Maybe it is, Dre. But I don't want to feel like my kids are living in a world that is so flawed that they can't have any hope.
Oh, so you want to talk about hope, Bo? Obama ran on hope. Remember when he got elected? And we felt like maybe, just maybe, we got out of that bad place and made it to a good place. That the whole country was really ready to turn the corner. You remember that amazing feeling we had during the inauguration? I was sitting right next to you. And we were so proud. And we saw him get out of that limo and walk alongside of it and wave to that crowd. Tell me you weren't terrified when you saw that. Tell me you weren't worried that someone was going to snatch that hope away from us like they always do. That is the real world, Bo. And our children need to know that that's the world that they live in. Come on. Let's finish watching it. Let's see what they're gonna say next.
That's a powerful clip, and Judge Byrdsong, thank you for sending that over. I think Dre's words, and of course Dre is played by Anthony Anderson, are an appropriate place for us to begin. He said that he wanted his children to know the truth of the world that they live in. So talk to us about why it's so very important for us to begin there. Why do we have to have a systematic approach to the subject of race?
We can start back in 1857. We hear about, and we sometimes throw this case around as an important case in history, the Dred Scott case. But few people have actually looked at the opinion to see the words that came from the Chief Justice of the highest court in the land describing the African American here in this country. And I think it's important, bear with me, that I read you the actual text so you can appreciate that this was the mindset of white America as it relates to African Americans.
Less than 200 years ago.
1857.
Wow.
In the opinion of the court, the legislation and histories of the times and the language used in the Declaration of Independence show that neither the class of persons who had been imported as slaves nor their descendants, whether they had become free or not, were then acknowledged as a part of the people, nor intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument. It is difficult at this day to realize the state of public opinion in relation to that unfortunate race, which prevailed in the civilized and enlightened portions of the world at the time of the Declaration of Independence and when the Constitution of the United States was framed and adopted. But the public history of every European nation displays it in a manner too plain to be mistaken. They had for more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit.
For our benefit.
He was bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and traffic whenever a profit could be made by it. This is what hits the point for me. This opinion was at that time fixed and universal in the civilized portion of the white race. It was regarded as an axiom in morals as well as in politics, which no one thought of disputing or supposed to be open to dispute, and men in every grade and position in society daily and habitually acted upon it in their private pursuits as well as in matters of public concern without doubting for a moment the correctness of this opinion. In other words, they're saying just like the sun is hot, black people are less than human. And this was the United States Supreme Court. So if you can imagine setting that up in terms of white America's ideology of how they perceive us, we're still battling that today.
And if I could follow up on that, it's so interesting that you reference our history in that manner, Judge, because it is also American history that the very first organized municipal police forces, their job was to catch runaway slaves.
Get out of here.
The very first organized police forces were sheriffs, county sheriffs, and they were specifically created and employed for the express purpose of catching runaway slaves and slaves that had somehow gone off the reservation, whether that be politically or literally. And that is how police started in this fine nation. And when you drop the history that you dropped, we have to also look at it through the context of our current dispute. And when we have an issue like we have today, it cannot be divorced from our history here in this nation. And because we're talking about law enforcement now, because that has captured the public imagination in the way that it has, it is fitting that you talk about our history in the context of where we started.
So given that history that's embedded in the law, given the history of these of Sheriff Department police rooted
yes.
in catching Negroes who had escaped the plantation.
Basically, yes.
How, when you look at this court case in Minneapolis, based on your extensive experience, tell us what's going to happen. What are their defense attorneys? What arguments are they going to present? How long is this trial going to take? And to what extent can we really expect justice to come out of this situation?
Okay. All of those questions that you asked are very important. But when I look at it through the context of my history, my experience, I'm playing the long game.
Okay.
I mean, I've been doing this for so long, 25 years. This is an event that happened just very recently. I don't look at it in terms of what's going to happen in court, or I don't look at it in terms of what are going to be the defenses. I look at it in how has our consciousness as a nation traveled. Okay. And whether this is likely to happen again, whether it's not likely to happen again, depends on where we are as a nation in terms of our ability to understand one another, where we are in terms of our ability to recognize an act of murder at the hands of law enforcement. Now, The reason why I'm bringing it to you that way, Pastor, is everything on the outside reflects the inside.
Okay.
Everything that happens in the world reflects the way that we think as a nation, the way we think as people. And for so many years, from what I could see, there was never even the conception of charging a police officer with a crime for killing a black man or any man for that matter.
Not even a conception.
It wasn't even a conception. Oh. And that we now have a situation whereas I believe it was, it might have been year before last, 2018, we had a jury, which was mostly white, find an officer that shot Laquan McDonald in Chicago guilty of second-degree murder. Now, I look at it, again, I play the long game. Okay. I look at it like, okay, a lot of people say that we're not going anywhere, that this is not happening, that we're not making any progress. I can tell you that when I started in the early 90s, this type of thing happened way more than it does now. And what I'm seeing now, in terms of protesters, in terms of the international impact, you're seeing white folks carrying signs now, Pastor.
Yeah, it's different.
Younger folks, you're seeing a different approach to police misconduct. So to me, I hate to put it like this, and I don't want to disappoint anyone that may be listening. What happens in the court is secondary to where we are as a nation. And where we are as a nation is going to depend on our collective consciousness. And I'm going to ask you, I'm going to bring you one more thing. When I look at the Floyd tape, I've only been able to see it once, and even then I kind of had to fast forward through it because it's too close to home.
You got to look at it.
I know.
Sorry, you have to look at it.
Just
you have
close.
to listen to that man literally beg for his life. And that is the part in terms of this is a human being. He did not have a weapon. He was in restraints. And there were 3 other officers also holding him down.
Yes.
All right, we got 2 attorneys.
So
going at it.
when you package all that, and I'm just talking from a social standpoint.
It's true.
Sure.
This was a human being. You have to look at that tape and listen to his words. He cried for his mother. A grown man crying for his mother.
So how do we combine the 2 approaches? How do we address the tactical issue to address the tragedy to ensure that justice is served?
I can talk about all that.
While at the same time play the long game, as we understand that this particular case is part of a larger consciousness. How do we do that at the same time?
First of all, what you have to understand is for every George Floyd that you see, there's hundreds that you don't see. And those are the people that have comprised my caseload for 2.5 decades now. Wow. I know about slow death. I know about positional asphyxia. I know about people who have been shot and cried out knowing that they were going to pass and receiving nothing but a lack of mercy from those standing around them. I see George Floyd. Yes, it's horrible. It is absolutely everything that you said, Judge. But I used to always ask my mother when I was a kid, why did we call it Good Friday when Jesus got tortured and killed on this day? Why did we call it Good Friday? I used to always ask her that because I still never understood it. That should be Bad Friday. A bad thing happened. But I later come to understand, as I understood the real spirituality of Christianity, that that horrible thing saved, the nation. George Floyd is one man who I wish we could have back, and he died horribly, but the thousands of people that he will save as a result of what he has gone through means that his horrible death, and there is no excuse, and I will never defend it, there is nothing. But what I'm saying is that it has been the catalyst for such a dramatic sea change in consciousness means that we might be approaching the area where I can say that our children may have a different relationship with law enforcement than we did.
I think grandkids, personally, but
grandkids.
True that. Well, part of what I want to talk about. So how do you capitalize on that consciousness so that we don't have another 300-400 George Floyds in the next 10 years.
Specifically, what people are understanding is that they have power. And that is very important, Pastor, for the average person to know. Because people feel powerless a lot of times when they see something like this happen.
Sure.
But when just simply being out in the street, that is making people listen on a level that all of the hundreds of cases that I brought over the 25 years I've been doing this don't even compare to.
Wow.
And showing up for jury duty, realizing that this is your country, realizing that you're not on the outside looking in, that you have the ability with your heart and mind and actions to affect change, that the things that happen don't just happen randomly. They happen for a reason. And when we look at the history that Judge Byrdsong so eloquently described, you look at how we are and where we're going as a race. If you look at the total time we've been on the American soil and you compare the time that we've been free to the time that we've been slaves, it's been longer. Slavery has been longer. Right. And when you count the time that we've been able to vote against the time that we've been here, well, it's even smaller. And when we understand that we are able to change this thing, we don't have to look to anyone else. We don't have to see anyone else. By the way that we think and feel and pray and congregate, we are determining the trajectory of the entire nation because our struggle is emblematic of struggles that are not quite like this one, but they have similar characteristics worldwide.
Yeah, and I think that's why the world has been galvanized.
And I've never seen that before, Pastor. Have you, Rupert? Judge Byrdsong, I should say.
Well, we know the cell phone camera has enlightened a lot of people.
Yes, if I meet the man that made that, I will drop and give him 20 push-ups immediately.
Now,
that's just something that he deserves praise. That has changed everything.
It has. Now, again, and I have to keep going back to the historical context. In Jim Crow times, or even past Jim Crow times, when lynchings would take place, this would take place in broad daylight, in front of women.
Great point.
In front of kids, and arguably, it's not like law enforcement did not know that there was a black person being strung up and set on fire.
They were the cops themselves a lot of times.
Right?
Themselves, yeah.
And so when you have that and they celebrate it and then they take a picture of it and then send it to their friends as a postcard. Now, I was given a seminar on celebrating Black history, and I talked about lynching postcards, and some of the people were like, that happened in America? We still have this sense that this incredible oppression and violence and terror against Black people happen on TV. And so when you see Floyd on the ground and he's dying in front of you, that's just an extension of our of this history. Yes. That it was okay, that it was acceptable. And so now we're trying to move away from, the people who don't know the history, and they see this like, wait a minute, this is outrageous. And now you're seeing people like, wait a minute, this can't happen. We have some more enlightened people, but they're not informed. I've been telling people, listen, you need to know about these lynchings. You need to know about legalized murder in this country.
I got a deep question for you, Judge. How is what happened to George Floyd any different than a lynching?
It's not.
So my question is, what are we going to do about it?
It's not.
So, here's a question I have. So I read an article in the New York Times last week that said one of the issues that prevents reform in police departments is the power of police unions.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm wondering, do you agree with that? And if so, what are some specific ways that power can be chipped away at?
Well, what I always tell people is that the number one thing that can affect police behavior are other police officers. It's just like gang members. When they're listening to other folks that have done time in prison that are in the gang, they talk to them, they can get to these guys in a way that no one else can. The rank and file officer will always take direction from his superiors or her superior officers. And the superior officers take their direction from the chief, and it goes like that. The consciousness can be one way or it can be another. But the way that it starts most effectively is if you have law enforcement that are actually committed to protecting and serving, rather than seeing the police force as an us against them kind of situation, like a military operation would say that we're in a community, and this community, the members of these communities are our enemies. A police officer leaves the academy knowing nothing, okay? They can be anything. They can be good, or they can turn into some of the men that we've seen terrorize the nation. It's all going to be how they are molded. And if they are taught that their job is to serve, you're going to have a different kind of officer that's going to turn into a different kind of officer later in life. But the issue is that, as Judge said, all too often the image of a black male is associated with criminality, barbarism, lawlessness, laziness, generally the kinds of things
Dangerous.
Dangerous, violence, generally the kinds of things that you want to either marginalize that person's life or do away with them somehow. And we see the effects of that in the sentencing of black men. We see the effects of that in the issues related to the use of force by police officers. The thing that I'm trying to tell you is that the number one thing that can change a cop is a cop. Now, the second thing that can change a cop is public opinion. Because police, until very recently, have enjoyed have had such a belief system that has said that they are higher than a normal person in terms of morality, higher than a normal person in terms of their sacrifice. And what we're starting to see now is that they're human. And what we're starting to see now is that they may even be subject to a lot of problems that are associated with the abuse of power. Those come from regular folks. Anyone that's been in the justice system that started when we did knows that we've been dogged in the 90s and really for the last, until about 5-6 years ago, by a perception that the police don't lie. Now, we all know that that might not be the whole story, but a lot of people in America are still just now finding that out.
When I would do jury trials when I was at Metro, I was always have to be concerned about the juries coming in already inflating the officer's testimony or deflating it. And I used to tell them, you have to listen to the case first. It's unfair for you to say that all cops are good or all cops are bad. You have to listen to what this particular officer testifies and make your judgment on that. That's what your role is. On a bigger scale, what Brian was talking about, we need more Brian Dunns in the world who are going to litigate these cases and make sure people are held accountable. We need more black officers in the field to watch these things happening. We need more black prosecutors who are making the decisions whether to file. We need more black judges who are able to have a keen perception about what's going on. When I was in Metro, I think I said this last time, I dismissed more cases in my 1 year than probably most of my colleagues have in 20 years. Why? Because I was able to appreciate and see when there was some racial profiling going on, and I was able to stop it. And I was only able to do that because I was in that position
and
to
you're
see
one
it.
of the only ones doing it.
Well, now
That's
see, this
why
is
when you
interesting.
say there need to be more folks that are getting into the law and that see the system as something that they can own. Pastor, I would like the judge to talk about how it was that you came to see this as something that you can do. This is my country. This is my courtroom. Instead of saying, this is something that's outside of me, or instead of saying that, you made it yours, and you actually owned it, and you actually developed the consciousness, like instead of saying, this is something that's away from me, I can actually be in there and do it. How did that shift happen for you?
Now,
that's what I even want to hear.
Now, Judge, before you do that, this conversation is taking an interesting turn because it's fascinating. Last week, all of the questions were tactical, okay? But you two honorable gentlemen who are in the system are suggesting that we have to be more than just tactical, that we have to deal with the culture that's embedded in these institutions because of the history.
exactly.
And you keep saying the word consciousness.
Yes, I do.
Right. So whatever tactical approaches you make, if fundamental change in institutions come from the consciousness of the people running the institutions.
Inside out is what I say.
Wow. Right. So that's a very interesting question that I'd like you to answer when Judge is done, and that is, how do we create more Judge Byrdsongs? How do we create more Attorney Dunns? Both of you, and me for that matter, all of us are the beneficiaries of traditions that shaped us. I was fascinated to read some about your background today, about how you found out about Morehouse through, the basketball coach telling you the heroes of who went to Morehouse and why you should go. I mean, you were handpicked by Johnny Cochran. Right. There is no Thurgood Marshall, without a Charles Hamilton Houston. So how do we reduce the fact that out of 600 judges in LA County, only 2 of them are black and you're one?
He's also one of the most respected. I'm sorry, but if you're on the inside, lawyers know, and people that are on the inside know exactly who Rupert Byrdsong is.
Sure.
And he hasn't been a judge for comparatively long compared to a lot of the others. But
6 years next week.
Yeah, you got more. You have more respect than a 60-year judge right now, and you're still headed up. And part of that is because you have not apologized for who you are. But I think what folks really need to know is, how did you get there?
Yeah.
I give a lot of credit to our alma mater. I'm just going to be real. I'm going to give a lot of credit to our alma mater. What was required at Morehouse, in addition to a module of American history, we had a module of Afrocentric history. So we had to look at and listen to Nat Turner was not someone who was a troublemaker. He was a patriot, someone who really loved his people. He was a prophet.
He was a prophet.
They didn't teach that at any of the schools I went to. I'll tell you that right now.
That's what I'm talking about. Exactly. So in terms of having that historical context, I keep coming back to history because it's important that we know where we come from and what we're about. When you don't have all of these negative images and negative stories about your self-worth, your self-esteem, your abilities, then when you go out into the world, you can make things happen. Even though they may doubt, even though they may look at you like, well, what are you doing here? And then when you tell them your breadth of experience and knowledge, they're like, wow. But let me tell you, even I'm not immune from that in terms of this perception because of the color of my skin. I'm going to digress briefly to tell this true story. So I'm at this conference, ironically, to talk about the problems of bias in the legal profession and how it affects jury verdicts. And so I was a guest speaker going to be on a panel. So it was a 2-day conference. The night before, they had a reception, and you can imagine how these conferences are. It's a legal conference, only attorneys and judges, and they have a bunch of vendors selling legal-related services. And so I'm walking the happy hour reception, and I have my name tag on, and every 2 feet I walk, people come to me, hey, Judge Byrdsong, how you doing? And, I want to pick your brain about this, and hey, how you doing? And it's so good to see you, and glad you're going to be participating tomorrow. This was happening for about a couple hours. This was on a Thursday evening. Friday morning, the next day, same area, the same place where I walked the room for several hours. I got this crazy notion in my head. Now, let me see something. I mean, this was so unscripted; it's unbelievable.
Took the badge off.
It's a true story. I took my name tag off. I put on a maroon hoodie. I still had on my suit, my tie. I just took my suit jacket off. I put on a maroon hoodie. I put the hood over my head, but my face was not obscured.
Okay.
True story. My face was not obscured. So if you were to look at me, you could see, hey, that's Rupert with a hood on. And then I proceeded to walk that same area where I was the night before for an hour and a half.
Wow.
And you already know where I'm going with this. For 2 hours, people I had known for 20 years, when I tried to make eye contact, they averted their eyes and refused to look at me, refused to engage with me.
Even though they know it was you.
And it was me.
Wow.
For 2 hours, and I would walk by, and I would do it. I did it deliberately.
These are people who knew you.
People who knew me for 20 years. I did it intentionally back and forth, and I would try to intentionally catch their eyes and they would avert. They would avert. They would avert. And I was like, I can't believe this. Then there was this one young lady. I'm going to call her name out, Roxanne Davis. She's a plaintiff's employment attorney, white woman. And I'm walking through, and she looks at me, and she says, Rupert, why do you have that hood on? And I almost started crying because I was like, wow, thank you for that. Because she saw me.
Not the hood.
But everyone else saw the hood and the dark skin, and they associated that image. I don't want to mess with that.
Wow.
And so when we got to the seminar,
Wow.
I'm really hyping this up. I had another one of my colleagues to go up as me. And he was pretending to be me, and I stayed in the audience with the hood on. And so they were doing the introduction. Another thing I found was rather striking because they claimed that they knew me and they all appreciated my presence there. When they were introducing me and he was up there, no one said, hey, wait a minute, who is this guy up there? Nobody said anything. They just watched. They just watched. They introduced, rolled off my resume, and he's sitting there smiling. He's a good friend of mine, Judge Victor Byrdsong.
Has to be a good friend to do that.
And he got a kick out of it. And so they introduced him as me, and no one said anything. And then they said, okay, well, welcome our panelists. And they all started clapping. I said, wait! I stepped up from the back. I said, that's not Judge Byrdsong. I took the hood off, and you could hear a pin drop, and you could hear the proverbial, ooh.
Wow.
And they saw me, and you could just see the shame on their faces, knowing that they did see me, and they remembered that black man with the hood, but they were afraid to engage with me. And I called them out, and I said,
the seminar was on bias.
That you
and
were
you just
conducting.
gave everyone a crash course.
And it was like, wow. And even to this day, this was like
This
three
is
years.
very interesting.
This is like 3 years
You
ago.
have to be to do something like that.
This is
Anyway,
like
go
3
ahead.
years ago, and I still
That's
have
some
people.
more out
And
stuff
again,
right
at that point, Pastor, he's only a 3-year judge at that point.
but
I mean, come on now.
No, Steve, this is really interesting to me because last week again we spoke so much about tactics, but you all are suggesting that the tactical Patrick Lencioni said culture eats strategy all day long.
Brother,
And
let me
if the
You
culture's
have to understand
not
it.
right,
yes.
You have to understand it.
Wow.
You have to address it.
You can teach these kids how to deal with people that are mentally ill for 1,000 hours. You can teach them de-escalation techniques for thousands of hours. You can teach them everything. But at the end of the day, they're going to leave the nest. And they're going to be out there, and it's just going to be them and maybe one other person. And you can train that person.
but when they see me
But
with
at
a hood
the
on,
end, yeah, at the end of the day, it's who they are that's going to determine whether they listen to that training and whether they implement that training, or whether they simply throw it out the window, which we see a lot of the time. If we are raising racists in America, we're going to have racist cops. We're going to have racist lawyers. We're going to have racist auto mechanics and plumbers and janitors and everything. And the thing is, it all matters how they are on the inside, because the way we think on the inside determines our actions. It's all secondary. So teaching a police officer tactical training is part of it. And it is a big part of it. And they do have to learn certain things for their safety and for everyone else's safety. But I see how these officer-involved shootings play out. I've seen so many of them, Pastor. I've seen how it happens. And honestly, it's about a 10-second period that you can see something flips. And somehow that person that is going to end up pulling that trigger no longer sees the victim. The suspect, we call him the victim.
They see a
no
black
longer
man with
see
a
the
hood on.
humanity in that person. They no longer see.
because, you know, Dred Scott said they have no rights that a white man is bound to represent.
Right. And white men get killed too. Don't let me take that away from you. I've represented so many white families. They don't put it out in the street like everyone else, like we do. But there are hundreds, in fact, numerically even more. I have represented so many white families who have lost their sons, who have lost their husbands. And the pain that a white mother feels is no different than the pain that a black mother feels. It's all a jarring event to lose a son that way. It's probably the worst thing that can happen on this planet. But it boils down to how that officer sees humanity.
Well, let me ask this question. If I can't change how you think, can I at least change your behavior? Like if I...
You might.
If I can't get you to
one more
read...
analogy
good
before
trick.
we move on. Let me give you one more analogy. Suppose
Man, if I can't get you to read the souls of black folk, can I at least, if you shoot me whether I'm white or black, is there some way that behavior can be systematically addressed?
let me show you something.
Okay.
This will blow your mind.
I'm just asking.
Just imagine.
Okay.
Think about any, because I see all these shootings all the time. I've seen so many. I never forget. But imagine anything. Imagine George Floyd.
Okay.
Okay. He's basically wanted for using a bad $20 bill. Now, suppose there were no police involved, and it was just Rupert and you and me, just the three of us, and we had to bring him in. Do you think we could get him in, just the three of us, without hurting him?
Yeah.
We certainly could.
Yeah, just for $20?
Anything. Okay, imagine anything you've seen, okay? Do you think that the three of us, with the love that we have in our heart for God, that the love that we have for humanity in our heart, we don't have any tactical training at all, but if you put the three of us out there, you don't think we could talk a person down who was committing what would potentially be an act of suicide by cop? Or don't think that we could basically deal with someone who was mentally ill that had a broomstick or some kind of a pipe or something without us getting killed or that person getting hurt? We would simply move slowly, and we would speak from our hearts, and we would talk to that person like a human being. And what I am telling you is we would be more effective than an officer with all the training in the world who's going to yell at that person and treat them like an animal.
Who has a different mentality.
And when you really take it from that point of view, because we're not just judges and lawyers and pastors, we're people who have a very strong connection to our Creator, all of us, the three of us. Mm-hmm. And that guides our actions every day when we get out of bed. But if you just imagine that, you could think of anything. You could think of any person who's been killed. You could think of Ahmaud Arbery. You think if there was a person that didn't belong in our neighborhood and the three of us were together that we would go after them with shotguns and guns, get in a car and chase them down with shotguns? Do you really think that we would that would occur to us? Never.
Well, it wouldn't, but that's what we're talking about. It occurs to them. So if I can't, so again, the long game is to shape their consciousness. Okay?
Yeah, they have to be reprogrammed.
Yeah, they have to be reprogrammed.
We do too. We do too.
But while they're being reprogrammed, how can we address their behavior?
You got to call it out. I mean, let's go to 2020. Let's go to Amy Cooper.
Amy Cooper. Okay.
Okay, and I'm sure most of you have seen this story, where Amy Cooper was a woman who's in the park, and she wants her dog to run free without a leash in violation of the park's rules. Okay, and she comes upon another Cooper, no relation, Mr. Christian Cooper, who's there as a bird watcher.
Doesn't the Lord have a sense of humor? Yeah. They're both named Cooper. Doesn't God have a sense of humor? Anyway, keep going, Pastor. Go on now. I'm sorry, Rupert.
And so he says, well, hold on. I'm trying to enjoy this ambiance and watch some birds, but your dog off the leash is not making that happen. Could you please put your dog on the leash? Again, those aren't his rules. Those are the park's rules.
And this man is a professional. Well, his hobby is watching birds.
Yeah.
Now they think brothers are thugs and rapists and all. This guy was
he's on the
gig
board
was watching birds. That's what he did.
Minding his own business, following the rules, and he just asked this woman to follow the rules. Okay,
scaring the birds away.
And this is where we go to the buzzword. So then the privilege to not have to listen to this black man telling her what to do. Like, hey, my dog's not hurting anybody. I mean, who are you? And then they got to get back and forth. And then on video, she boldly says, I'm going to call the police and tell them that I'm being threatened by a black man.
Yeah.
Now, she's going to weaponize this man's skin color. But the scary thing is that she honestly believed that this was going to teach him a lesson. All she had to do was make a false claim, and she would have her privilege validated. That is what's scary, and that's what needs to be called out. So I've been asking.
She also got fired from her job.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so,
She blamed everybody else for what happened to her. She's like,
still,
all of this is happening to me.
So yeah, she had white privilege. She weaponized his skin color, blah, blah, blah. But when it was all over, I'm not sure her consciousness has changed. I'm not sure she thinks any differently about black men. But I do know she's looking for a new job.
She's going to hesitate. She's going to hesitate and not do that same conduct again.
But is she going to do that because her consciousness has evolved, or is she going to do that because she got fired?
Pastor,
that's what we have to hope, and that's why we have to.
What we have to hope.
We have to keep not just hope, but we have to keep.
Such a good point you just made.
But we have to keep calling it out.
I understand. Let's take them all the way back to Dred Scott. You know, let's evolve their consciousness. Let's do all of that. But at the same token, there was a consequence to her behavior.
Yes, it was.
And partly because she was dealing with an educated black person who understood the power of me. I think he works in communications.
But have you thought about what are the odds, brother? What are the odds that we're talking about that event now, when all of the time that happens and nobody ever hears about it? What are the odds that these two people who coincidentally are named Cooper have been observed by the entire country? Think about, just stop and think about that.
Okay.
And if you really stop and think about how that erupted right around the same time everything else, it's no accident. All of these things are bubbling up at the same time, and we cannot see them as isolated events. Those are not accidents. It is no accident that this happened. Because he videotaped her and because everybody watched it, she lost her job. She'll be all right. She's going to get another job. She'll be fine. But the thing is,
by the same company.
What that event is doing is it's getting people to look at themselves. It's getting people to evaluate who they are.
It's very interesting.
But what's so interesting and what is so beautiful and so mind-boggling, because it's out of our realm of ability to understand, is how these seemingly random events all seem to happen, and they're all happening now. We're all talking about them now. But more importantly, this is illustrative of a lot of problems that folks are having, and it's stimulating a discussion. I think the change happens simply from looking at it and observing it. I think simply like that light is shining a light on it. We can talk about doing this and doing that and doing this, and I can give all kinds of examples. But I think human behavior really does change, not in a loud way, but in a very quiet way. And as somebody looking at that and going, no, that wasn't fair. That wasn't fair the way they did him. And the way that she was so arrogant about it. And maybe, you know, this idea that a person is better than another person just because of the color of their skin, maybe that's something that we should think about. It has been said that what really changed, what turned the tide in the civil rights movement was when the images of people, getting water hosed. Water hosed.
That did more than all the marching.
Thank you. It's just like George Floyd. Think about it. These things are no accident.
And even LBJ,
but
Lyndon B. Johnson.
But King was also pushing for a bill.
Right. And LBJ was going on record saying and calling black people all kinds of names, but he signed that legislation.
But he didn't sign it because his consciousness evolved.
Exactly. That's very important.
But
it's very important.
All of these things come together in ways that we, in our conscious mind, don't fully understand, but we make it happen. Because enough people saying this is wrong affects change.
Yep.
And so if you look at the images that really, those iconic images of people being blown all over the place by water, and even white Americans who had been comfortable in the social hierarchy as it was said, now that ain't right.
Now,
that's it. That's a very good one. I'm sorry. The comfortable. And that's the charge that I have been raising with many of my friends I grew up with in high school and my law school classmates. I've asked them, when these things happen, do you say anything? Do you enable this attitude that I can be comfortable in my prejudices and my biases, or do you say something to get them to confront those biases and realize, wait a minute, that's kind of an ugly spot.
Now this is
because they're not going to change if they're not made to feel uncomfortable.
No, but this is very interesting, and I tell you why. Because our title is navigating and changing systems. Now, both of you have successfully navigated the criminal justice system, but
I don't talk about the first 20 years of my career. Only the last 5.
The last 5. but
a lot of trial and error, baby. Emphasis on error. Anyway,
But part of what I hear you all saying is one of the tactics has to be first the infiltration of these systems. And then you have to work to shift the consciousness of the people in them, which means, at a very fundamental level, black people or no minority can make the type of changes that are necessary by ourselves.
Well, I don't know if it's our job to police others. I don't know if we could be like racist police or this is wrong, or checking another person in an aggressive way doesn't work. Saying that your thinking is wrong, you are wrong, that never works. That's why we're having such divisions in our country now between the...
There's a way you got to do it.
Yes.
I agree. Your approach to educate, to enlighten, has to have a certain temperature. Because let's be honest.
Now, does temperature mean tone?
Tone,
bearing,
timing,
tone,
timing, tenacity. You know, we're going to tease alliterations, but
like a good preacher, you don't call him a preacher, right?
I've been called that back in the day when I used to do trials.
I accidentally called him pastor once. He's definitely a preacher.
Yeah, he got it in him.
But when now I lost my train of thought. You got me.
And we all getting old.
Let me give you an example of that.
It has to be a certain type of temperature, tone, timing. When you're trying to influence someone's thinking.
Yes, because if they remain comfortable, and I've actually had people, proactively call me and say, okay, I need to start doing something. This has affected me in terms of this isn't right, and I know I have been complicit in not saying anything, which is a tacit approval of that behavior. So when you bring it to the light,
which this moment has done,
bring it to the light like, wait a minute, this isn't right. We need to do something about it. And then that's when they do change, because they have to be convicted. It's not going to happen in a vacuum. It's not going to happen in a vacuum.
And it doesn't happen quickly. And folks really need to understand that if you look at just the phenomenon of officer-involved shootings, it happens so much less than it used to happen. People hate when I say that. When I started in the 90s, the uses of force, the homicides by police, they were so much higher than they are now. People don't think so, but it moves gradually. It's like the earth moving around the sun. It's day turns into night. We're moving. It's happening, but you can't see it, but it is happening. We are on a trajectory that will arc its way in the right direction if we don't stop believing that it can, and if we don't stop this fight. And what we're seeing now is people are committed to it. And there is no right or wrong thing to do. There is no right or wrong thing to say.
Just say something.
But you got to do something. And I told a person he was a big Trump supporter, and he was talking about all these things, and somehow the concept of the hand on the crotch, which was a big issue in the election. And I just asked him, I said, now what do you think would have happened to Obama if he got caught on camera saying something like that? It was just a soft question. But he had to just stop and think about that, because it's a different world. It's a different paradigm for the President Obama. But nevertheless, sometimes just making someone aware of it. I don't think challenging a person ever really works, because they get into a bunker and they get defensive. And they believe you're challenging them as a human being, not what they think or what they've said. I think that the idea of simply showing people what's up, showing them, which is some of the things that we've seen recently. I think that gentle approach, now again, I hate the word gentle, but the idea of showing that the person's thought is divested from who they are. There is a difference between attacking a person and attacking what they're saying and thinking or what they're doing. If you attack the person, you're going to basically invite a person-to-person struggle. And we're thinking about things that are more,
Institutional.
yes, and
Cultural.
ideological. Yes.
Conscious. Okay, so this is very good because what it suggests, and please, if you have questions that you'd like to ask any of our panelists, you can begin the process of sharing those with us now. Very, very excited. And this actually is quite interesting because it seems to me that one of the ways that we can begin this process of institutional systematic change is to cultivate the skill of building alliances. So how do you do that on the bench? How do you do that as an attorney? And what types of tips and tools would you offer for those who work in environments where they have the opportunity to influence the thinking of people who have been convicted by this moment?
Well, it's important on your day-to-day job that you have an opportunity to educate people. You have an opportunity to elevate people's thinking about race relations and interactions. So the month of February, Black History Month, when I take my bench, I'll say, good morning, everybody. Who knows the significance of February in this nation?
In court.
In court.
They love you down there.
And so, some people will sheepishly like, Black History Month? Correct. And you understand that Black history is American history. Let me give you an example. For those of you who practice employment law, do you realize that the seminal case of the United States Supreme Court came about, which set the analytical framework for all discrimination cases involved a black man named Percy Green?
Wow.
Do you understand that because of Percy Green's fight in trying to establish himself the right to have employment, to not be discriminated against just because of his race, that now we have this framework to deal with discrimination on
Just
all
leave it
types
off,
of
y'all.
bases? That's American history, but as an African American. And so I would always invite people in my gallery, this is a time that you can learn something about the contributions that African Americans have made. So you know that African Americans are indeed Americans. This will help us to understand some of these problems that we have, some of this back and forth. It doesn't need to be, because we've always been here. We've been here from the beginning. And it's refreshing. It's refreshing for me, and I enjoy it. Who's the first African American Supreme Court justice?
And you're doing this in court before you call your
Before I
docket.
call my calendar.
You talked about Morehouse. I'm going to flip it to you, Pastor.
Okay.
You are eminently successful. Your journey can't really be duplicated because you couldn't tell a person to do what I do because it's never been done before. Somewhere along the line, some light switched in you, something. And you said, I can do this. I don't believe that I have to have a rule book. I don't have to have anybody else tell me how to do it. Judge talked about Morehouse. If you were going to say about how did you evolve, you're not just a pastor. You're an inspiration. You got so many gifts. But how did you realize somehow I can do this? Because the odds were terribly against you.
Yeah, this is interesting, the turn that this conversation has taken, because what you're suggesting is, for authentic change to happen, consciousness has to evolve. But
yes,
as you
that's
said,
what I'm trying to say.
Right, but as you said, that consciousness is shaped as it was shaped for me, not only at Morehouse, but I went to Morehouse because a preacher, like the young preacher, in New York at that time was a guy named Gregory Groover. He was the president of Morehouse SGA. And he came back, I think I was 11, and was like, you're going to Morehouse, right? I grew up in an environment where intelligence was taken for granted, where I was loved without restraint, where I never doubted my capacity. I grew up in an environment where we were exposed.
Don't just gloss over that, man.
Yeah.
That's very significant.
No, never doubted my capacity. From a father who marched in the civil rights movement, a mother who was a a mathematician. So intelligence was celebrated, achievement was expected.
You believed you were special from a young age.
Absolutely. And part of that was family. Part of that was growing up in the black church. Then all of that was intensified when we went to college. Because Morehouse is one of the few places, I mean, like, they don't celebrate, like, the greatest compliment you could get at Morehouse is if you tight. Man, that dude is tight. Not well-dressed, not a good athlete, but tight is an indicator of your intelligence. Like, guys fought to be like Roop, you know, to be in Phi Beta Kappa. Like, you know, if you didn't get that gold key, like, you were deficient, you know? So, so achievement, we were taught that your job is to do what you do so well that no man living, no man born, or no man dead, yet to be born, could do it any better. And so a conspiracy between the college I went to, the church I grew up in, and the family that raised me gave me a confidence that regardless of whatever environment I went in, I could shift it because my consciousness had been shaped.
No.
So I see what you're saying, right?
Believe it or not, when we talk about the criminal justice system, we have to also talk about the way that we think and the way that our people think. What do you tell a young man that really doesn't, he's never been told he's special, and he doesn't realize that he is?
Yeah, this is very interesting.
Because I think that it all cascades together. And we're having a lot of problems since we've been on the American soil because we've been told that we are not special. We've been told that we are nothing. And if you internalize that, your reality will mimic that. What do we do to teach our youth who may be from broken homes, who may not have
Who didn't grow up in church or go to Morehouse?
or who may not have a mother or a father that can be relied upon? How do we teach them that they are special? Because all of these things will change.
Once their mentality changes.
And it'll change the way the criminal justice system works. All of these strange things will work together to change the way we're treated.
Wow.
Part of it is changing as a people, the way that we think.
Yeah,
you got to have individual engagement. I mean, when I was in
individual engagement.
When I was in law school, I was in Buddies of Nashville, and where we would be assigned a young man in school who's having problems behaviorally. That they give him that label, right? And so you put him with someone like me who's in law school to meet with him, to talk to him, and to give him something to look forward to. There are organizations like Concerned Black Men of Los Angeles. I invite them to my courtroom every year. They come, they get to sit in the jury room, they get to watch me do my thing and say like, wow, okay, this is someone who looks like me, and he's in power, he's doing something important. That's something that I have to aspire to do. So there are ways to do that, but
there is no Thurgood Marshall without a Charles Hamilton Houston.
Exactly. There's not a Rupert Byrdsong without a Robert Belton.
And there's not a
Brian Dunn without a Johnny Cochran. There is no way.
I think we have some questions, Pastor. You may want to jump on those.
Wow. Okay. If Black Lives Matter, how do we get our black men to stop killing each other? Where do we go, and how would you get them to listen?
You have to understand, first of all, your internal divinity. You have to understand that whether you call it God, whether you call it the watchmaker, whether you call it Allah, he does not miss. There's no accident to every human life that is created. And in that is the secret to understanding that there is going to be a path for you. The problem that we have as people is that we're, from a very early age on the American landscape, not in all over the world, but we're taught so many negative images about ourselves. We're taught things that our unconscious mind perceives from the way that we're treated, from the images that we have. And what we have to understand first is our internal divinity, and that just simply understanding that the way that you're created, the way that you are, is no accident. And that you do have a purpose, and that God would never and has never created any being to fail. It's just not part of God's plan. Understanding that first is probably the key. Now, how to develop a young mind into someone that'll turn into the beasts that we see up here, that's the whole village's job. It's not just the one parent. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You want to take a stab at it?
We have to get into the schools. We have to get into the schools. Raise your hand if you ever had a black male as a teacher when you were growing up.
Man.
I had one.
Yeah,
One.
I had a band teacher. Had a band teacher.
Sunday school, not a regular school.
But in elementary school, think about how many black males are roaming the halls, and again, this image. When I would do the Buddies of Nashville, when I would go to visit my kid, I would actually have. It was actually sad. The kids would look at me like, you see this black man in a suit walking in the hallways as an anomaly. Like, what is this being? But you literally could see the pride. Seeing someone who looks like me, and I get that all the time
Rupert,
in court.
Also, you're
I
not
get that all the time in court. That used to make me feel good.
And never
you're
seen
not
a
an
black
athlete,
judge.
and you're not a rapper, and you're not an entertainer.
I do play
someone-
basketball.
Well, you're someone that is.
You got pretty good
but
jumper,
you're
too.
not on the Lakers, brother. I'll tell you that right now. You have made your career with a brain, and I'm telling you that is more accessible. And we have been taught. Our young folks are taught that success in America, you have to be in the entertainment business, or you have to be some kind of an athlete, and those types of ideas of success are limited to so few people that it's not realistic. What you have achieved, simply developing a profession, developing a skill, doing something no one else can do professionally, that is something that we have to embrace, and we haven't yet done that.
Yeah, we have to invest in that next generation. We probably should.
There was question number 6. Question 6 I thought was very interesting. How do we get our people from being angry to being agents of change through education, empowerment, and actively engage American cultures and subcultures with impactful influence? It's quite a question.
Yeah, the education is part of it. When you understand how slavery has affected the mindset of African American people, when you understand that, and then you're able to combat it, that you know that the narrative that Roger Taney said about black people being inferior is a false narrative. That there's nothing factual about that at all.
It's drilled, though. Even into adulthood, it's drilled.
Exactly. And so people need to understand our history, need to look at what we have been able to accomplish, notwithstanding the oppression. Have that pride, that self-esteem, and then likewise go out and make it happen. We still have to do it.
The first part of that question was really deep, though. And I'm still kind of mulling it up. She said, how do we go from being angry?
Oh, I'm angry.
How do we go from being
I'm
angry
angry.
to being agents of change, as if those two things
Are
are
separate.
mutually exclusive?
I've been angry.
So
Right.
one feeds the other.
But wait a minute. You got to really think how complex that is, really.
Yeah, that's a great
Because what the person that wrote that said was, how do we go from being angry to being agents of change? And the idea that anger is something that can inhibit you. All three people on this panel have had to deal with anger in some way. I've had to come to terms with anger on a lot of different levels, because it can eat you up. It can destroy you from the inside out.
Yeah, that's why we die younger.
And it's especially as a young man, that's a real problem that I had to deal with. I kind of came to terms with it now, but the idea, I don't know if I could tell an African American person not to be angry. I don't think I could. I don't think that might really be patronizing, even though I've had the same experience. I think the idea of anger is to really watch it and understand why you're so mad. Now, if you're just angry and you're doing it can be used, but it can also be something that can be channeled.
It needs to be redirected into positive change and happening. I mean, I've been very angry. You're
not still angry, brother? I'm just messing with you. I'm messing with you.
I have broken down and cried almost every day since this happened because Cooper and Floyd happened on the same day.
I'm not going to watch
but you got to.
I can't watch it.
You got to, and you have to listen to those words. You have to listen to him cry for his life.
Because his internal divinity notwithstanding, he's still going to get angry.
I got to tell you, videos, every time a mother, I'm telling you this is true, I've had so many cases. The hardest thing in the world, the greatest pain in the world, I'm convinced is a mother that has to bury her son.
Whew.
I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what race. No mother can watch the video.
What about dads? Hold on. What about us dads?
Yeah, I guess but for some reason, they leave the courtroom. Even if we're in trial, man, I'm going to say, okay, and the second witness, we're going to have to show the video. They'll come back after the lunch break, and the jury will never know why they left. And it's because they just can't. Now, you ask me, I'm a practitioner. I know what's on the video. I've been doing this for 25 years. I know why I don't need to watch that video because I know what's there. I've seen the images of it. I can articulate it, the begging for the mother. I know what that's going to do to me if I watch that, Rupert.
Wow.
And I don't need to watch it. I know I've seen enough of it. But even of everything I've seen, all of the shooting, I have seen more people get killed. I have handled more dead bodies. I have dealt with more death and seen more death. But that thing, I cannot watch. And I'm not really able to articulate in a way that the average person will understand.
So Duke Ellington said that he took his pain and turned it into the blues. So how do you do that? How do you take your pain and turn it into being a judge? How do you take your pain and turn it into being an incredible super lawyer? How do you do that?
I mean, you have to just think about the big picture. Was I personally affected in terms of the fact that Floyd had this interaction? Does it change my day to day? Well, in a vacuum, no, it doesn't. But the fact that could have been me. And people want to say, like, no, that wouldn't happen. It never happened to you. No, that's not true. I gave an example.
I think it was me.
I gave an example of how I can suddenly put a hood on and no longer be someone that people want to talk to. I can be in my own courtroom, standing by my seat. Someone comes in and assumes
that you're the janitor.
That I'm not the judge and ask, well, is the judge available? And I'm standing right in front of him.
Now, do you feel anger? What do you feel? What do you feel in that moment?
I don't feel that because I have.
Your consciousness has evolved.
I have come to expect.
You expect it.
That I've used this term. There's this thing that I've kind of developed, coined this phrase called default demotion. Okay? And that is that until I say something that objectively demonstrates that I have this skill, that I have this power, that I have this position, that without that indicia, the assumption is going to be that I'm not going to be someone important. I'm not going to be someone who makes things happen.
So you just assume that?
I do. And sometimes you get some enlightened people who are above that, but I'm always prepared that that's going to happen, and then, okay, here it comes, and then I step up, and then they're like, oh. So I put this on my post. So I had a trial, all white men. The lawyers were white. The parties were white men. The court reporter was a white male. I'm the only black person in the courtroom.
And you the judge.
The least diverse...
Male court reporters, period, of any race are rare. But
the least diverse trial I've ever had. So after about a 4.5-day trial, case was over, the court reporter said to me, Judge Byrdsong, I really appreciated, sitting in your courtroom. I really love how you handle yourself. It was an honor to work with you. I said, hey, man, I appreciate that. You're welcome anytime, and I look forward to working with you again. Okay. Fast forward 2 weeks. I'm across the street of the courthouse at Kendall's, where people go and hang and have lunch or dinner. I go over there to meet one of my colleagues for lunch. and I see the court reporter sitting there. He's having lunch, eating by himself. I said, hey, how's it going? He said, hey, how you doing?
Don't know who you.
Hold on. You can love this. So how'd that trial turn out? Okay. I said, oh, yeah, the defendants, they crashed and burned, and so the case settled because they knew we were going to have a second phase of the case. It was a bifurcation. You understand that, but I'm not going to get into all those details. So after I said that, he said, so what did the judge do? So hold on. Gets better. So
What did the judge do?
I kind of, and I said, well, I decided that the plaintiff had not waived its rights under the contract. Therefore, there was going to be an actual trial on the merits, and they decided to settle after they knew it was going to have to be a trial. His response to that was, no, what did the judge do?
Wow.
So I've told him twice what happened. So now I'm looking at him like, are you absolutely kidding me? And so he's looking at me like, waiting to hear me tell him the story about what the judge did. And I'm looking at him like,
wow.
and then it hit him. About 15 seconds later, it hit him. And he was like, oh. And you could just see the mortification on his face. And he got up and he kind of started sheepishly walking over to me. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I said, hey. I waved. I said, don't worry, man. You're not the first, and you won't be the last person to think that I could possibly be a judge. And then he walked back to his seat.
This is very interesting.
So it's not above me. So when people say that this doesn't happen and yet that you've achieved, you arrived. No,
Listen.
I'm not immune from it. But I have to try to educate. I have to try to let people know, like, hey, look, man, you got to see me as a person.
Wow.
The fact that I have black skin has nothing to do with what I do or how I do.
This is very interesting.
But it happens.
Now, somebody said,
There's some questions. We need to get to the questions.
said, we've been playing the long game for 400 years. What is the short game? Where's that at? We hear that partisan is a long game, but that's been 400 years plus and counting. What's the short game?
Vote.
If the author of that statement is referring to a conception that we can have a quick fix that's going to make everything right all of a sudden,
Not going to happen.
that's just misplaced. But if you are talking about what can be done in the short run, yeah, there are very specific examples. I think that as a culture, we fail to understand that the thoughts of others don't control our destiny. Only what we think controls our destiny. And that's something that is very hard to wade through. A person's destiny will not be controlled by the ignorance of others, which Judge just pointed out, or the hatred of others even. It's what you think, what your I am is, what your I am, fill in the blank. That's what will control your destiny. But I think, as a race, as a culture, as people, we're so worried about what everyone else thinks. And that's a false way to model one's life. And you have to really understand that, because just the story that Rupert just told us, that could knock a lot of people off their center. That could knock, if you didn't have a base.
I'm grateful that it happened to me and not someone else. Absolutely.
But the reality is it's because you know who you are. And no amount of ignorance is going to take that away from you. We have to really translate that down to the child who may be experiencing pressure because he wants to do well in school, or the child that may be feeling internalized feelings of guilt if they are trying to literally do something that's going to create lasting benefits down the road vis-a-vis fighting against the inertia of drug use, or fighting against the inertia of choosing a path of violence. We have to kind of realize that there's certain laws that are applicable to all people, and we can win. It doesn't matter what hand you're dealt, you can still win if you know how to play know how to play it. If we think that there's some reason, for example, that there's a white barrier, that white foot is taken off my neck, then I could survive, that's a misguided way of thinking. And I think that you know, we seem to get knocked off course so often by just even having the thoughts of another person dictate our destiny.
Yeah, well, this was...
And the quick fix that... Anyway, go ahead. I don't know if we really answered that question.
This is interesting to me because, to be completely honest, based on the feedback we got last week and even my whole thinking about our approach tonight, I promise you, it was much more tactical in my orientation. But I think this has been great because...
I think we had a very tactical discussion tonight.
Right, and that's what's interesting, that these are two prominent tacticians. And what you all are telling us is that, you know, no tactic is as strong as an evolved consciousness.
Exactly.
And that's very, very powerful. Let's take this last question.
Answer to number 8.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I'm
are
always
you
open.
3 men open to doing mentorships to help our next generation get in positions to change things from the inside out?
Always open. I'm in Department 28 on the 3rd floor in the Stanley Moss Courthouse downtown, 111 North Hill Street. I have an open door policy. I always invite people to come watch to see how I run my court. I invite them back to chambers, although since we're in the pandemic, that's not going to be as available right now. But I have an open door policy, and I welcome anyone to come visit at any given time to watch and to learn, and maybe I can give you some tidbits of inspiration. The other question above it about trying to educate our other judges, oh yes, and I've actually had made my own personal commitment to be a little more, I don't want to say confrontational, but I want people to confront their own biases and perceptions. I was just sharing a story earlier where we're in the lounge and we're talking, and someone made a comment about if they were an ambassador for President Trump, it would be cool. But someone said, but you might get assigned to Belize and get kidnapped. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I basically, started to challenge my colleague about that statement, and of course they had never been to Belize. I said, so where are you getting this from? I said, no, that's not cool. I've actually been to Belize. This is a beautiful country, and it was very safe. So I'm not understanding why you said it. And so at that point in time, I know for a second he's at least thinking, well, man, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And now he's going to go do some education to learn about that country. So those are small steps, but they chip away at the things. We call them implicit bias because they really don't know that they have them. They don't, and so they can't deal with them and manage those biases unless they identify them, capture them, and make sure that they don't act on them. But it goes the other way. I mean, if somebody came in who went to Morehouse, there's gonna be a bias that, okay, I'm gonna assume that they have their stuff together, right? I mean, so that's how bias works. I mean, so but that would be
directions.
Right. That would be an explicit bias. If I saw like, oh, I know he's gonna do something, then of course, until he says something otherwise, then all bets are off. Because the bottom line is, I have to still deal with facts. I have to still deal with the issues and put the biases in a box. That's not my job. My job is not to operate on the biases. However, I can see it in Brian's face, I do have to operate on my value system and my morals, and that always has to be intertwined with my application of the law. Because the law is here to protect.
Pastor Joe's going to answer the mentorship question.
Well, they know, I'm much to the chagrin of my wife, I'm always here. I stand outside every Sunday. I would love to mentor anybody like I do on a fairly regular basis. That's the marvelous thing about the church. It's a bridge for so many people, and as it was for me. And so I revel in the opportunity to help shape anyone become who they want to be. Closing thoughts.
I really think I've left it all out on the floor. I'm a big believer that whatever it is that we think we are will somehow become who we are in the outside world. I think that the secret to anyone or any family or any race is to take control of your own thought processes, such that you find out what God wants for you and don't allow yourself to be influenced or knocked off course by the thoughts of others. I think that one of the things that we fail to realize is we keep focusing on what we do and what we say, and we don't think enough about how we think. And the true path of one's destiny is always going to be determined by who they think they're going to be. And the destiny of our folks on this landscape has been marred by a whole lot of institutional forces telling us that we're nothing.
Wow.
And we got to get past that.
You know, Dr. Carter G. Woodson said something that I think is an appropriate way to conclude this conversation. He said, if you control a man's thinking, you don't have to control his actions. He said, you don't have to tell him to go to the back door. He says, if you control his thinking and the back door doesn't exist, he will go without being told. And if a back door doesn't exist, he will cut one out for his benefit.
The worst thing a slave could do is learn to read. That was absolutely taboo. The worst thing. Think about why that would be.
Yeah. So see, this is very profound.
Self-esteem.
I will say it again. I did not expect our conversation to take this turn, but this has been quite profound because what we have heard from two extraordinary tacticians, and please do not allow, those of you who may not be familiar with their background, don't allow this conversation to make you think that these are not hard-nosed tacticians who know how to win. Both of them are. But it's very profound that from these hard-nosed tacticians, we have been reminded of a very powerful truth, and that is that change on any level, systemic change on any level, has to attack the mind. And if we do not attack that, then these cultural norms that are embedded in these institutions we're trying to change will never change. And I think that is a profound reminder, and I'm profoundly appreciative of your time and your contribution.
Thanks for having us, Pastor.
It's such an honor, Pastor.
Man, listen.
Whenever you ask me to do something, you know I'm going to have to do it.
Thank you.
You know
I
how hard it is to
appreciate
get a
that.
hold of me, but it's just an honor. You just got such an involved consciousness, man. It's so beautiful to be around you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks
This
as
is
always.
phase one. Keep it going.
Yeah, phase one. We
it going.
plan to have a conversation every week for the next several weeks as we identify these various systems that need to change. Thank you so very much for tuning in. We love you, Ms. Robinson, and I miss you and hope to see you really soon. Tune in on Friday. We're going to have a young preachers roundtable. Elder PG is going to bring in a distinguished group of young clergy persons from across Los Angeles to share their thoughts on how the church can be involved at the forefront of this struggle. God bless you. Have a marvelous night, and I'll see you soon.